online podcast. Artificial Intelligence News. Research and thoughts from leading AI minds, researchers, and enthusiasts. With host Tennisha Martin. This is a show where we discuss artificial intelligence at the intersection of technology, cybersecurity, education, and society. We're going to let you finish, but Tennisha's got thoughts.
Open source AI. So we actually had reviewed this for an assignment that we did at school, Jeree and I, and it was about what exactly does open AI mean? Everybody has seen when we talk about software what open source means, but there's been some debate within the AI community about whether or not AI open source is different than the traditional meaning of open source. So there's a bunch of documentation out here about the subject, but what it comes down to is that organizations like the Open Source Initiative that define, basically what is open source, have an idea of what open source means, but the AI community thinks it's something completely different. When folks put out their open source models today, it's generally they'll put out the models, but they won't put out the data that has the models have been trained on. So while they're giving you the, like the ChatGPTs of the world, they're not necessarily telling you how those models are trained. And there's a lot of money and time that goes into training those models. And, I understand, like, from a profitability standpoint, you don't want to release, your money maker, but, is it truly open source if, we don't have access to all of the parts of it? So what are we really talking about here? Is this about data or the training models? Any thoughts, ladies?
My first thing is to address for, I'm not going to say the layman, but more or less, not a lame man, but the layman folks who are like, why does this matter and what are the impacts? Think of it from everybody loves Chick-fil-A, or most people do, right? Someone told me the other day to Google the ingredients for Chick-fil-A sandwiches. You know, it has 50 some odd things listed.
I saw that as well.
And so this is, I feel like it's related, but not, it's kind of a parallel. You just get the thing. And some people want what they're given at face value and they don't care, or it doesn't matter as much as to what all is involved, but to a developer, for a security practitioner, they have further implications. So I guess the point of all that to say is it does matter. It matters to different people for different reasons, but it's definitely worth asking the question and having the conversation.
And another thing to kind of think about, to hold in tension, there's a lot of discussion around, I guess, responsible AI and things like that. And so by the time you give people the ability to manipulate everything, including your trained models, you kind of gets hard to prevent misuse and, providing, misinformation around things.
Yeah, I agree. I think for me, like how I kind of answered in class, I think people are just everybody wants to come up with something. It's kind of unknown. There are people trying to come up with definitions, but maybe the people who are coming up with these models, AI models, are like, okay, why don't we have a say so? But at the end of the day, doesn't matter. Like we have to have a definition towards it, and we got to really know like what are we talking about? Are we concerned about how the models are built, or are we really concerned about the data itself? Are we concerned about educating the community, or are we expecting that when it comes to AI in general, is everybody just going to learn on their own and you're like on your own, or should we have some type of governance around that?
Absolutely. I think for me, when I'm thinking about like from a security perspective, the models, it's great that we have the ability to use them, but it will be helpful to know what the guardrails are, because most of the like the chat GBTs of the world, the llamas, they have guardrails that are implemented. But I think that when we're talking about the data itself, I think for me that's probably where the most problematic aspect is, because I think a lot of times the data itself are where the issues are, not necessarily from a security perspective. I think a lot of times the data can be skewed and garbage in, garbage out. But when it comes down to it, I think that when we're talking about it being open source, you can't really call it open source unless it's actually available for you to be able to review it and update it and change it appropriately. And I think part of that is also taking a look at the security, to be able to put in those guardrails, to be able to keep it from being used for malicious purposes. Because I think the same way that we look at open source AI from the perspective of what can we build, what are the applications that can be met, there are probably also some folks that are saying, hey, how can we use this to make money, or for malicious purposes, for example. So what are your thoughts about whether or not AI technologies are open source? Would you consider like ChatGPT an open source tool? I mean, I know that OpenAI went from a nonprofit where we probably could have made it a bigger argument, to a for-profit company. But are tools like that, are they open source?
I'm gonna say open-ish. Somewhere closer to or away from being open source. But one of the things that I kind of look at, even for when we start discussing like a for-profit model, are the intellectual property concerns that are involved in. So what's the company's incentive to make it better if they can't at least turn a profit? Because at least with pharmacies, they get the lead way to make some money, before the generic people come in. So kind of view it that way.
That's a good topic. I feel like we might need a whole episode on intellectual property just by itself, because realistically, a lot of folks use these models for a lot of different reasons, and it's collectively, unless you put it into their version of like incognito mode, it's collectively learning based on everything that's being put in. Who owns that data at that point? Like if I have a model and I put it out there for people to be able to order cupcakes or something, right? And we'll see the different questions that people ask regarding the cupcakes. Can I then use that for that data for my marketing purposes, or can I, what I'm saying, like who owns that data? Does it belong to whomever the maintainer is, or whoever those folks that maintain the code, or does it belong to whoever generated provided the data in the first place, or how does that work? That's a good
I
thought.
feel like was it Scary Movie when he like dips his thing and he's like, my germs, that's who owns it. I asked Copilot, it's the thing about AI, so why not? I asked Copilot, is ChatGPT open source, right? And the answer reads thusly: ChatGPT, developed by OpenAI, is not open source. The technology behind ChatGPT is based on OpenAI's proprietary series of generative pre-trained transformer models, GPT, which are fine-tuned for conversational applications, while the outputs generated by ChatGPT are based on open knowledge and content available on the internet. The source code and the services based on it are not open for public use. OpenAI initially released ChatGPT as a freely available research preview, but it now operates under a freemium model where the base version is free and the advanced features are available under a paid subscription. Thus reads Copilot to answer that question.
Copilot 2024.
Look, Copilot might be like, but I'm open source.
You know what? Let me ask it. It's like, defend yourself. Are you?
But like one of the things, I believe in one of the articles, they discuss the license structure and how, the traditional definition of open source doesn't have that. And, with ChatGPT in there, you pay for a version, that's one of the arguments in place, like is it or is it not, but we're basing it on like our open source definition of software instead of this new, more complex dynamic organism.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, when we traditionally talk about open source as it relates to software, we're talking about, unrestricted license to be able to use it for whatever it is that you want to use it for, right? But, when you look at any of the open source AI models, a lot of them, basically have, terms of engagement in terms of things that you can and cannot do. And some of those they've attempted to try to hard code the, guardrails into the application, but you can get around those a lot of times. So realistically, I'm not sure how that works. Jeree, you had thoughts?
I did. I was just gonna say I agree. Like right now, open source, when you think about that, you're thinking about software. But as we know, any new thing that comes out in technology in general, we're trying to figure out, okay, what is it? I mean, just with AI in general, like we don't really know, at least I don't, but I feel like society doesn't really know what AI can really do. It's always somebody smarter than the next person. It's always somebody innovative than the next person. You don't know what kind of model that somebody can build, or you don't know what they can do. But I say that to say that because we don't really know what open source is going to mean for AI. And I think that it may be defined differently from open source software versus AI because it's two different capabilities. Not to say that in a technology world, we don't have like different definitions, especially in cyber, that kind of mean the same thing and can kind of go hand in hand. But I think because AI, again, there's so many different things you can do with the models that people who are into machine learning and artificial intelligence that are building out, they can say, well, to us, this is open source, or this person may say, hey, to us, this is open source. So it's really just kind of like to me, it's kind of like a cat and mouse game. Like you don't really know what it is. And then, like I said, when we talked about one of the articles in class, who's going to be involved in making this definition for open source AI? Who's going to be involved? Is it going to be only AI SMEs? Are we going to have say-so from the government? Are we going to have say-so from top cybersecurity organizations? Like, who's going to sit at that table to say, hey, this is what it is? Because then depending on who's sitting at the table, they may favor what open source software is and say, hey, we should make it similar to this. But then it may be somebody from a startup company like, no, like we did X, Y, and Z, so it should be like this. So it's really like turning into like a cat and mouse game. You really don't know, like Tom and Jerry, who's gonna win.
That's a great analogy, and I agree absolutely. I think that whenever we talk about regulating something or determining, who is going to be the gatekeeper for it, we always have the question about who's going to take ownership. And I think in cybersecurity, CISSP terms, it would be like who is the person who's accountable for making sure that it's kept in line. And realistically, I don't know that we can necessarily come up with an agreement for that. I know that when they started talking about it, a couple of the articles we read mentioned that they got together, like folks from academia and from industry, and put those folks together. Some of the major tech companies that have AI products, they put those great minds together to try to figure out what should be the case. But when it comes down to it, I think that we have competing interest in terms of, we have the proprietary AI where you have, certain customizations that are possible. And then you have and I think ChatGPT probably falls under that category. And then you have, the open source AI systems where you have people who are able to actually, build out their own tools as well. But I feel like in order for it to be truly open source, you have to have both the data and the model. But when it comes down to it, the data itself, the training itself, is the most expensive and time-consuming part. So for the people who've invested into these open source tools and then make them open source, how are they compensated for their time or their effort, right? If
Hello? I feel like
I'm sorry, give me a second.
All
Like,
good.
Barbara, is that you?
You know what? I can actually fill it in the meantime. So, one, to the ask of the question of, what does Copilot say about itself on whether or not it's open source?
Mhm.
It's so for ChatGPT, it was like, nah, it's not. But for Copilot, it was like, kind of.
I
So
am.
it says, right? The answer is Microsoft Copilot is not entirely open source. However, Microsoft has open sourced a Copilot chat sample app that organizations can use as a blueprint for their customized chatbots based on advanced generative AI technology. And the benefit there is that it allows developers and organizations to build upon and customize their chatbot experiences. So they're like, kind of. And then for the question of, so who's defining what open source is for AI? um, the open source initiative, nonprofit organization, and I think Tennisha mentioned that in her intro, but they've convened a diverse group of stakeholders, including researchers, lawyers, policymakers, activists, and representatives from major tech companies to establish a clear standard definition of open source AI. And that, I think, could be a whole other episode, Tanisha, while things are kind of spiraling up to the others. The responsibility is on a nonprofit organization, and I feel like a whole sermon and dissertation can be shared as to this is so important, it's so impactful, and the responsibility falls to a nonprofit, which, as volunteers of a nonprofit, we can speak to.
Look, that could be a whole spinoff a ministry for real. Yeah. So my next question is, what are some of the security considerations that we're talking about if it's open source? Who's responsible for, basically implementing standards for security? What does that look like? Or what could that look like?
I would definitely expect the government to to be involved just because of the ramifications of AI. So
Yeah, they put out a risk management framework for AI, which basically said something along the lines of there's, the possibility for bias and discrimination, based on how they're trained, which I thought was super interesting because generally, the frameworks that are put out are generally, much less opinionated than that. So I thought that was super interesting. Jeree, you had thoughts?
Yeah. I feel like I brought this up, but it was an article or a law that the European Union passed as it relates to AI and how they want their citizens to handle it. So they have entire governance around it. And it just made me think about one, like we've mentioned, the concern is who's going to govern all of these things, because all of the different technologies or trends that's going on right now, somebody is being accountable for it. But because AI intelligence is in the name, you're building it to do something. So again, like I mentioned earlier, and I may sound like a robot repeating, but Somebody is always out there more innovative than the next person. You don't know what they can build. So one, that's a concern. We don't know what somebody may have artificial intelligence do, or the model. Secondly, again, the governance around it. You mentioned that there's like a risk management framework, but is there going to be anything else involved? Are they going to try to pass a bill? Are they going to try to have some type of law to try to manage that? Because it's a little bit more, even though AI has been around since the 50s, it's still evolving. So who's going to step in and say, hey, this is what we're doing? And it's just, I don't know. To me, it's so many concerns. I really want to know who's going to govern this process. What's going to be in place that's going to stop somebody from making something open source or not making it open source. But I mean, we're talking about open source, but who's going to stop somebody from doing that? How are we going to ensure that? And obviously we don't have all the answers, but that's like the first thing I think of. Like, we already, I don't know, don't shoot the messenger. This is my opinion only. We're already kind of behind from a country perspective. Hey, I love my country, just saying. But we are a little bit behind compared to other countries, especially when it comes to cybersecurity. So, we really should have been trying to get ahead with AI because we knew it was coming down the pipeline. But is this going to be another thing that we kind of fall short on, or are we going to try to get ahead? Like, hey, let's get something going around here. Let's get an initiative going so we can be able to govern this, because it could be scary for some people who are not in the industry and don't understand it. Like, I talk to a lot of people, you can't say AI around them because it freaks them out, but that's because they don't understand it. And it's always been, people think about iRobot and all this stuff. And I'm like, we got to just take a step back and like do some reality. You know what I mean? You got to understand AI. We have to embrace it. You got to understand it. And if you don't work in this industry, do your research, right? So it's just things like that.
I would add, as far as general security considerations, it's what we have in general for cybersecurity, vulnerability management, data protection. The things that were already concerns are concerns in AI as well. So I guess some of the specific call outs is just as I, just said, for vulnerability management, continuously monitoring and addressing any vulnerabilities that potentially arise, data protection, making sure that any sensitive information is handled securely, compliance governance, we already kind of touched on that. There are ethical considerations, we've touched on that as well. So if people who haven't, either because of apprehension or the nature of their organization, and they already feel like they're on a fire drill for the things that they're trying to currently maintain and haven't further explored as to what AI means, anything that you have traditionally considered a security concern, take that and then force multiply it for AI as well. Because if you are afraid of something XYZ happening, now it can happen faster and more effectively with AI. So
I think we lost you. Becky, Aleise, you had thoughts?
Well, I don't know. Yeah, I didn't know if we lost her. That's on mute. So I was like, well, maybe she was done. But and I guess one thing, a point to consider is to think about more higher risk AI applications, such as those using like autonomous vehicles, healthcare, critical infrastructure, and so like by the time we consider like past your Chat GPTs and things like that, I was working on some research and we met with some executives from a healthcare facility here, and they kind of started talking about some of the uses of AI even in the doctor-patient engagement. And I'm going, okay, well, I've seen the AI transcripts from like using it for a Zoom meeting, and it's always something wrong and you got to go back and change it. And so, but if you all are using it to capture, conversations between the doctor and the patient, how accurate, or how do we ensure the accuracy of that even, and then that's going in your medical records. And
Oh no, I agree with you completely. I think that when we're talking about like especially the security concerns, there are countries that have, to Jeree's point, like that are very advanced in terms of AI, and they've been like all brakes, no gas, moving towards the different applications as it relates to AI without any concerns for, the ethics or the security. But I think that, when we're talking about open source, there's a lot of questions that need to be asked as far as like, if we're putting this on the, OSI, are they going to be the person, the group that's maintaining it? Are they going to be the person that, if they go out of business, or if they lose their funding, for example, what happens to it at that point? Is it going to be deprecated or ended of life? Or, what's going to happen as far as like the maintainers? I think there was a breach that was not too long ago that was pretty high profile that had something to do with someone who had started maintaining an open source over the course of a couple of years and then had slowly putting in like backdoors, and then it became like a whole big thing, within the last couple of months, if I'm not mistaken. But my point is that, at that point, that's a lot to be putting on a nonprofit, especially when nonprofits tend to be, underfunded, and things of that nature. So it's super interesting to see how this is going to play out. And I think with a lot of things, it's like, hey, if we're all gas and no brakes, then things end up where the chips may fall, or they end up where they are at that point, or I don't even know how that works. But I think that there's a lot of implications if we don't get an answer to this, because and I think the biggest one is Aleise was saying earlier, the intellectual property. Who owns, if it's open source and the data that's being generated, who owns that data?
Right. And so then now you get privacy concerns with, potentially PII and other sensitive information that's being shared because of the open sourceness of the tool.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that was the last of my questions that I had. Any last minute thoughts?
Aleise, you brought up about the AI being used in the healthcare field, like between doctor and patient. And when you said that, it just made me think of imagine like they're capturing a conversation, and what if it's automated and goes right into that portal, and let's just say like somebody was getting tested for something and they're like, oh yeah, like no, you don't have it, and then maybe artificial intelligence captures like, yeah, you have it, and like that can kind of catch somebody off guard. And then like, what do you do at that point? Because one, that's reputation to the hospital or to that particular brand of hospital. It may be multiple. That's again somebody's sensitive information. It may, or what if it goes into the wrong patient's portal? What if it goes to the wrong doctor? Like what, it's just all these things. So when you said that, and I'm someone who I have an autoimmune condition, so I thought about, yeah, I'm all for AI or technology helping with some of the cure and encouraging some of these people to do that. But when it when it comes to like that human-centered approach, it's like I need that. I don't want to talk to a computer, or I don't want to talk to a model or let it do it for me. So that's just interesting to hear. So it just, man, you could do a whole episode on AI in the medical field.
Look, I was going to tell her, let's get it.
Absolutely.
Literally.
That just made me think that there was a news article probably a month or so back where an airline had gotten sued because their chat box that was built on an AI model was basically providing information to somebody about a refund or something. So based on that information that they got from the chat box, they went and bought another ticket. And then the airline tried to tell them that they weren't going to get a refund for the ticket that they ended up not using because the information that was provided by the chat box was wrong. So the person sued, and the person actually ended up winning getting their money back and some additional things. But what the court found was that the companies are responsible for misinformation that's put out by their chat customer service or whatever, if that's what they're using, right? So I thought that that's super interesting. And what's going to be interesting is if when we look at medical applications, when we look at a lot of the different applications of different AIs, are the people who are building up on the model, are they going to be liable if something happens, if something, somebody gets hurt or, somebody's harmed or whatever the case may be? Are they going to be responsible for that? Or is it the case that it's going to be whoever is the maintainer of the open source code? You know what I'm saying? Like, so at that point, who's responsible for, when AI goes wrong? Look, that's another episode.
Look, who's responsible?
Yeah, I feel like we came up with like 5 topics in just this one episode. That it could be like that. These topics could be their own episode.
Absolutely. Any other last minute thoughts? No? All right. So does anyone have anything that they would like to promote?
I'll go. I just came out with a cybersecurity children's book. I wrote it tailored to ages 0 to 5, but anybody can read it. Anybody can buy it. It's called The Adventures in Cybersecurity with Huggy Hugglesworth. It's based on my son. He's the love of my life. So I've been working on this for 2 years. The first book is called Huggy Goes to Cyberspace. It's available for pre-order right now on Amazon and Barnes & Nobles. And today is May 3rd, and the official launch date is May 7th. So I'm trying to make this into a series. So, like, go out there and get the first book. I think I just love cybersecurity so much, and I really think that our younger generation can benefit from it. Growing up, I didn't see a lot of people that looked like us in the field. Everybody wanted to be a doctor, nurse, lawyer, actor, and all of that. So I want, young Black women and men to grow up like, oh, I want to be in cybersecurity, or oh, I want to be interested in it. So, you can find me on Instagram, Read the Cyber Boss, on LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook. If you find me on one of those, you'll likely find my personal page. But support, and I'm just thankful for the opportunity.
Awesome.
Look, I'll just plug SquadCon. So anybody that's in Vegas for Hacker Summer Camp, or if you just want to come out to Vegas, August the 7th through the 8th, come out. And I think Tennisha could maybe put together an AI panel.
Hey.
That sounds great. Let me look at my PTO.
Right?
We will provide you with business justification if needed to prove the return of value. Co-sign on SquadCon, and then also use the opportunity to hype up the homies who are on the call here, the illustrious Tennisha Martin and the incomparable Dr. Aleise McGowan will both be presenting at RSA next week. So if you're going to be in San Francisco for RSA, make sure that you avail yourself to the excellence that is the both of them. And also, SquadCon, come through.
Well, Beck, plug your session. Don't do that.
Okay. Also, I will be hosting or leading a session called Cuckoo for Structure. The coup is COO, pun there, since I am the COO for Black Girls Hack, and it's organizing your way to success. I feel like in cybersecurity, people always talk about the sexy, cool things, i.e. AI, hacking, dun, 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 I'm in. But there's also some of the foundational structure things of making sure that they are processes in place and procedure and documentation. And I know it's annoying sometimes, but I think that's what helps set the foundation for success. And so that is what that session hopes to discuss. And it's going to be one of the birds of a feather sessions, so it won't be recorded. Success. Feel free to speak honestly, because it's a safe space and no one will hold what you say against you.
All right.
All right. Well, thank you, ladies, for coming out and hanging out with us on another episode of AI Thoughts Online. We'll see you soon.
All right.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you.